Hello world, WayofTime here, bringing to you another installment of the Blood Magic Developer Commentaries. Now there's been quite a few changes since the last time I have done one of these, mainly, well, we're in 1.16 and there's been a lot of recoding, tweaking, etc. going on, as well as a few new additions, such as the anointments and other mechanical changes. However, wow, that is a lot of living armor upgrades. Well, they only look like that because it shows each of the individual levels anyway. So, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is the next step of the progression for the mod Blood Magic. Currently, the way to transition from a tier 2 or a tier 3 altar to a tier 4 altar. Let me get my in-game guide in order to demonstrate. In order to transition from a tier 3 to tier 4 altar, what's required is you need to create some bloodstone bricks and to build caps for the altar. And these require weak blood shards in order to create, which requires just using the alchemic reaction chamber in order to get the weak blood shards from some nice simple sanguine reversion. Let's get the recipe. Sanguine reversion of some imbued slates, which frankly it's a little simple and there's not really much of a transition from tier 3 to tier 4. It's rather an immediate upgrade. What I want to do is add something a bit more interesting in order to progress through the tiers of the altars. Which is why, well, you probably saw the title of this video, which is why I want to introduce dungeons. Now, dungeons in Blood Magic have been something I've been working on for years. And I've never been able to fully realize them because there's been quite a bit of work required in order to make sure that they are new, unique, and challenging as well as rewarding. And, well, I think before getting into all the nitty-gritty of that, let's actually show what we have here. This is a new ritual, and if we look at the ritual diviner, the current name is obviously an unlocalized text. Man, I was supposed to have that fixed to a placeholder name. Anyways, the idea of Blood Magic Dungeons is instead of finding them out in the overall world requiring new generation and trying to find them yourselves, which might be a little difficult, and there's cases where you may find them and you are not prepared for them whatsoever, I wanted to make a more player-focused way to, well, actually summon the ritual, summon the dungeons. So the first ritual that you'd work with is this ritual, which I want to go with like Realm of the Hidden Bastion or something like that. Anyways, by activating this ritual, which needs a bit of polishing, the actual activation part, you can summon your own dungeon structure. Now, if we look outside, what this does is it takes the Master Ritual Stone, and on top of it summons the dungeon structure here, where we have our nice Master Controller here, which will be retextured and moved to a different location. Get some actual lighting so that it is nice and pretty for YouTube. You get a master controller that will be moved, different texture, and it basically is the heart of the entire ritual structure. You also have a bunch of doorways, which you can see here, and a bunch of nice thematic dungeon structures. And you also have an introductory chest. Now, what this chest contains is just simple loot to start with, but also your first set of simple iron keys. You'll get between 1 to 3 keys, and these keys will be used to open these doors. So if we were to pop into survival, I think I want to have a bit of protection just in case. Game mode, survival. If we pop into here and open it, we can generate a new room into the dungeon structure, which has some additional loot and mob spawners. If we open up another door, how did we get the same one? Come on. Okay, if we open up another door, we can get a different dungeon room structure. As you can tell by my bit of surprise there, the dungeon rooms that are generated are random. They're basically a weighted room pool that it can choose from with a bunch of different things. So here we have a blaze spawner that will start shooting at you, and it's a more farm-like area. Just gonna set this to peaceful so I don't, die and ruin everything. And here it's just a simple farm. You can get awarded with some ritual stones here, as well as some new items. So some dungeon chests, some tools. Here we managed to find a diamond hoe, and these loot boxes are completely random. As well as a few other interesting goodies that you might want to take note of when you're going through the dungeons, because they'll be helpful for the progression. So why would you want to generate a dungeon structure? Obviously there has to be some sort of usage for this, otherwise it's just a cool gimmick that's just provides a moderate challenge at the tier 3 level. Well, for one, you have a bunch of loot that is normal from dungeon structures. Let me get that out of the way. And these loot pools are also hooked into the standard vanilla loot chests, meaning that other mods' loot should come up in these. So if we open here, we see a different set of loot than before. And these leather boots are from vanilla loot tables, but you can also find copper or other goodies that other mods may introduce to these. You also find something called Tau fruit, which is a relatively new thing to blood magic. Obviously it's new because, I'm kind of showing it just right now. What are Tau fruit exactly? Tau fruit are kind of, well, it's a more complicated plant that you'll want to harvest for yourself. So if we get a hoe and we farm up, thank you, please, thank you very much. Ta-da! If we were to make a nice patch to grow these fruits, you can find that they will just slowly grow by their own volition. If we get a green grove sigil, they can be accelerated, etc., etc. So, seem like pretty standard plants to me, don't they? Well, they're not standard. If you were to grow these all the way to its maximum amount, you can't bone meal them for reasons I will get to in a second. If you grow them to their maximum size normally in a normal plant setting, you'll get some Tau fruit, which you won't get if you're in a creative setting, obviously, if you break them while in creative mode. Not very helpful. However, if you were to feed them some nice, lovely, tasty blood by some animals or mobs or what have you, I don't believe I have it player setting. Every tick, every time that it grows, it will steal health from the mobs that are near it. And if you look closely, it has now changed to a different plant. The fruit has gotten saturated. Now, once it's in this saturated form, it will require sustenance from nearby entities in order to grow. You can see that it won't grow if no one is actually touching it. And once it finally gets to its maximum size, let me dispose of these in a nice, lively manner. Come on. It's only a little pain. You've experienced worse from me before. We get a new fully grown plant, game mode, survival, and breaking this will yield a different type of fruit, which are these saturated taus. These regular tau fruit and the saturated tau are going to be pivotal in progressing through the mod. You'll be able to create longer lasting anointments, stronger potion effects when those are re-added to the mod, and these will also be required to create weak blood shards to progress to tier 4. Naturally, there's some other dungeon structures that can be generated, and you might find yourself in something like a hidden library, where you have some enchanting books and potion ingredients that you can get, as well as the possibility of living armor upgrade tomes, which you can add to your armor, and also some nice small bits of will. So we can see some nice random enchanting books, and these came from these are based on the stronghold libraries. Now, what will happen if you run out of keys in this sort of situations? Well, you can either make another structure, or you can craft those keys yourself. You get 1 to 3 at the beginning of a dungeon. However, you can craft them additional ones in the Hellfire Forge for a modest amount, which will allow you to open the remaining rooms that you have. For instance, you can get an armory. That is nice. So this dungeon structure is basically the introduction in order to progress from tier 3 to tier 4. However, what is the plan for other dungeon builds? So here I am in the world where I create all the dungeon structures that are used to create the rooms for those dungeons that I was talking about. And we can see that we have quite a few rooms, but this probably doesn't give any sort of information, so let's look at the nitty-gritty of what we have here. So here is the structure, or rather the entrance room for that simple dungeon structure, where we have the chest here that gives you your keys, as well as some gateways into other possible rooms. There's some schematic files that I then take this schematic and translate it into a room which has multiple doors that can be opened up to other areas. So we have our simple room, initial room here. We have our library that we saw before. Ooh, spooky. And we have some other rooms. For instance, we saw this blacksmith/armory area. We have our farm over here, and there's also some other work-in-progress rooms that I am currently implementing, such as Nether Portal Room, as well as a nice spooky dungeon area, kind of like a catacombs area. You know, it might be good if I actually have a bit of light for this, but I want to make it a little obvious that it doesn't, yeah, there we go. So you can see we have a catacombs area, as well as the work-in-progress loot tables that I am working on. So these are all the things that are for the simple dungeon rooms, where we only have one initial room, and it can only open up to 4 other rooms. Now you can see why it's called the simple dungeon, because 5 rooms total does not an entire dungeon make. This is where, well, the more complicated dungeons come around. Here is the work-in-progress room that is for the tier 4 dungeon. So something that you make with a ritual or other ingredients that requires a tier 4 altar in order to create and power, whether that's going to be through a large LP amount or otherwise. And we can also see that it has the aforementioned simple chest that I'm now going to need to replace because I messed up with the loot table. Don't want to actually use that. And similar to the simple dungeon, you're going to be able to open up adjacent rooms to other rooms of the dungeon. Now, by other rooms of the dungeon, I don't just mean simple one end rooms. You're going to be able to open up to other corridors which have T sections and other special one-way corridors. These are basically just all the corridors, and a special corridor that happens to be bigger than the others, which I won't get into. But there's also other dungeon loot rooms. So this is one of the possible rooms that your initial entry room will spawn you to, where you have multiple branching paths that are able to be chosen from depending on the key that you have. And there's also a nice ore hold here. You can't see the ore, obviously, because it's replaced currently by stone. However, when it is generated, you'll find one of the other pivotal resources that you're going to be required to progress through the mod, which is demonite ore. So one of the main reasons you'd want to generate these dungeon structures is to access this demonite ore, which will be required to progress in the mod and also fuel other strong goodies that you'll probably want to use when playing through the mod and other things. Now obviously this isn't the only room that you'll have. There's other corridors, which is just the corridor pool. A stairway that adds verticality in order to, well, add verticality to the dungeon. And there's also the possibility of spawning very large room structures such as this. Obviously, it is work in progress. You can tell by the fact that it has no roof. But it's something where you can find some netherite, some other loot, a nice house, and kind of how I picture it is this is where these dungeons are basically the structures where demons live, and you kind of rip a hole in the fabric of reality in order to bring them to your world in order to make use of them. And another possible room that I am still currently working on is the Forbidden Library, which is a large, spacious room filled with books, enchanting tables, and other loot, which I'm still gonna need to place down. So yeah, you can get some high tier goodies from this, and it's going to be required in order to progress to tier 5. Now there's other structures and mechanics going on other than just use key, spawn new room. There's going to be special rooms that will periodically spawn that will bring you to other points in the dungeon. For instance, if you open up onto this room, you can see it's a nice cavernous area with railway tracks, loot tables, and etc. And moving forward, if you manage to find special keys in the loot or through crafting, still not finalized, you can open yourself up to the mines. These mines are various other room structures that open up to further mines that will be filled with demonite ore, and it's basically going to be a high density area where you can get all the ore that you'll probably need to progress and do more powerful alchemy. Naturally, there's other rooms that you can open up to, such as its own versions of the branching corridors, paths, and there was one more that I wanted to show, but considering how big this place is, it's kind of understandable that sometimes I just get lost with everything. Ah, yes, it's over here. You can also open up to its own versions of loot, special loot that's dungeon specific, or rather mine specific, and there will be loot tables everywhere here. So that's kind of a sneak peek as to my current work and thoughts on implementing dungeon builds. I have a lot of ideas that I want to implement, such as more mine structures and other room types. Currently, the room types we have are the default type, the mines, but there's also other possibilities such as adding a series of rooms that are based on catacombs, other dungeons like that, maybe even internal forests and stuff like that. Naturally, that sort of building I'm not very good at because it takes quite a few hours to build something as intricate as a room like this. So, this is where I, well, ask if people are interested in continuing and helping out with making all the rooms required for dungeons. Essentially, the main thing I need is to have a wide variety of room pools and room structures that I can choose from in order to make a nice sprawling dungeon that the player can go through and basically find the loot and progress and have a nice dungeon experience. Because one of the things that I look for when I personally play Minecraft is trying to do exploration and combat. So these dungeons kind of tickle that itch for a nice sprawling exploration system. So if you happen to want to contribute to these dungeon builds, similar to the demon invasion system that I had before, I'm basically going to open this up to the community if they want to contribute. There's a few small requirements or specifications that I would have for dungeon structures that people may want to build. One of them, not a hard requirement, is to consider using the demon brick and demon dungeon blocks that I have implemented in the mod currently. Because obviously I'm trying to build off of that theme and motif. However, it's not a hard requirement. As you saw with some of my other structures, it is possible to add to the dungeon feel by using just purely vanilla blocks and using builds based on that. So it's not a hard requirement, but if you feel so inclined, building based off of these assorted bricks is going to be quite helpful. Another thing is that all the rooms, in order to, join them together, once again, it's not a hard requirement, but doorways kind of need to be 3 by 3. They can be 5 by 5 or like 1 by 2 doorways. However, those sorts of dimensions will probably need special care from me in order to make sure that they fit together properly. It's possible, but it might not look the best. Third, you don't need to add your own dungeon loot pools or anything. You could add your own chests if you want to just have a little fun as, hey, this is a suggestion of where some armor can be. This is a suggestion of where you want some blacksmith supplies or maybe some more demonite ore or things like that. Hey, maybe we can put some alchemy items. But it's not a requirement. Just the main thing I would like is the dungeon structures themselves, and I can do the rest of the hard stuff. Well, the rooms are kind of hard, at least from my point of view, because I only have so much creativity that I can do. Well, thank you again for joining me on another installment of the Blood Magic Developer Commentaries. If you like what you see, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe to future episodes. And hopefully they don't take another year in order to come about next time. WayofTime, signing off. Have a wonderful day.